Anna Berger, the animal behaviorist. This morning I want to talk to you about the word behavior and how I use it and how that's different than the way that it tends to be used in everyday speech. Yeah, I'm making these videos to define some of these words that are kind of scientific jargon, and I want to make those definitions really clear for you so that you can then use these concepts to understand your pets and help your pets live their best lives. And I also hope you'll have a great relationship with your pets as you learn these concepts and apply them. So the word behavior, when it's used in everyday speech, has kind of a muddy meaning with a lot of cultural baggage. And the word is often used in, you may have heard it used when you were a child in school. Maybe teachers talked about your behavior as either being good or bad. We often tell kids, you need to behave. And we use phrases like be on your best behavior. But especially that one, you need to behave or behave better or you're not behaving. Using the word behave that way is very different than how I would use it as a behavior scientist. You need to behave, that is sort of a phrase with its own kind of emotionally charged and a little bit convoluted meaning. Whereas when I use the word behavior as a behavior scientist, I'm using it to in a way that is more clearly defined, and I basically, instead of talking about things being like children behaving, as in meaning that they're being good, I will break things down a bit more than that. So for me, a behavior is a specific body movement or vocalization that can be clearly defined and then can be recorded systematically. So what that means is that if I'm watching an animal moving and going about its daily life, I'm going to see the way that that animal moves, and then I can break those movements down into discrete behaviors, and I can define those. So it can be anything from actually a complex set of behaviors we could call foraging behavior. So foraging behavior is an umbrella term that includes many different smaller behaviors that are used to access and eat food. But then, we could break it down further into those specific behaviors. One example would be picking up an object with it, like a parrot picking up an object using a foot. And that would be my little definition of that behavior, and I could call it foot manipulation. And so the behavior would be defined, and I would give it a title. So the title I'd give it, for example, could be foot manipulation, and the definition would be a parrot picks up an object with a foot, with one of its feet. Another example of a behavior could be stretching. I could call that, that would be the name that I give the body movement or action that the animal is doing. I give it the name stretching, and then I define it based on observable and clear characteristics. So for parrots, that could be stretching one wing behind, like slightly behind into the side of the body, while the other wing is not outstretched, as one foot grips a perch using the toes and another foot and leg are elongated in the same direction as the outstretched wing. So there I'm giving a very clear description of what is happening when the bird stretches, and explaining the ways that the body is moving. And if it were a vocalization, we can define those very specifically as well. I didn't look at vocalizations in my dissertation, but I do talk about vocalizations when I'm working with clients who are concerned that their parrots might be making too much noise. And in those cases, I'll take, a client might say, my parrot screams all the time. And I'll say, well, what is actually happening? How can we break this down into something more specific than the description screaming all the time? Because typically a parrot doesn't actually scream all the time. There are moments when that screaming behavior stops. So we can look more specifically at what the bird is doing. And then, so you could have like a contact call behavior, which could be a repetitive, short vocalization with a high frequency that's repeated 3 times in a row every minute, with a space of 30 seconds of silence in between, or something. That's just an example that I came up with, but that would be a clearer definition of a behavior that is vocal rather than a body movement. But usually when I'm talking about behaviors, I'm spending a lot of time looking at body movements, the motions and actions that our animals are doing. And you can use this to you can apply this to people as well. So while you're watching this video, you can be watching my behaviors, and those could be facial expressions. You can actually code those. I used to do this in a psychology lab as a research assistant, and one was the specific behavior of, which was making this expression, where the forehead wrinkles. And so whenever that happened on video, I would record that. And then we would know how many times this behavior, which is the raising eyebrows and crinkling forehead, happened. And then we could use that to predict interaction patterns between different people and explain social behavior of humans that way. But we can do this for our pets as well. For example, a study just recently came out talking about macaw body language, and macaws have a behavior that is blushing. So their face, like the skin around their beak, turns a brighter color, like a reddish color, if they're excited. And so there hasn't been enough research of facial expressions in parrots yet, because their faces are very small, and it can be really hard to quantify their facial expressions, which is a type of behavior. But when you're thinking about a little bird, like their muscles around their eyes are really, really tiny, so it can be really hard to measure those little tiny muscle movements. So facial expressions are one type of behavior, but they're on a very small scale. But another behavior that you're seeing me do as I'm talking is moving my hand. And that can be easier to see, especially if I pull back the video. You can, you can see my hand movements, and that is something I would define as a behavior. I could make it more specific. So a behavior for me could be clenching the fist. So maybe I'd call that fist. And then every time I did this on this video, I could record that, and you could calculate how many times I made the fist behavior. And then we could use that, analyze that data to, have a scientific study. One of my chickens has just come over here to say hello. There she is. So she just did some behaviors. She did one that was shaking her tail feathers. And that's one that I've noticed that my chickens do, where they shake just their tail feathers side to side. And I'm actually trying to teach one of them to do that as a trick because I think it'll be really cute. And then when I'm teaching it as a trick, I have to think of a name for it. So I might call that shake, and or I could call it shake your tail feathers, or I could call it wiggle. And so if I call it wiggle, I would still define it as only the tail feathers move side to side. And then I could even say how many times in a row that the feathers move. So you don't have to be in the process of training or providing enrichment to your animals to start observing these behaviors. You can spend some time watching your pets, and let me try to get these chickens back on camera, and then just notice what they're doing. So he's doing a turn around in a circle behavior, he did a clucking behavior, there's a walking behavior just in that snippet. Right now the chickens are engaging in some foraging behavior, which is oh gosh, let me try to get them on here. If I go over towards them, which is pecking at the ground to eat grass seed. And they're doing, so they're always, anyway, so sorry I can't get a clear video of them, but they might come back. But animals are always behaving. Even if an animal is sitting still, very static and depressed, that could be considered an inactive, static behavior, and you could define that behavior as perching and being still, and the whole body is inactive. That could be a resting behavior as well. So, but throughout the day, your animals are doing things. They are moving their bodies. They are going places, and all of these things that they are doing are different behaviors. And behaviorists like myself tend to take a non-judgmental approach to behavior, in that we just we observe what all these things are that these animals are doing, and then we define them as behaviors, but we don't say that they're bad animals or good animals, and we don't say that they are not behaving. Or see, do you get the difference between now when I say the phrase that I said at the beginning of this video, which you might have heard when you were little, like, you're not behaving? A behaviorist would say that you are always behaving because you're always performing multiple different behaviors. And kids who are being yelled at for not behaving actually might be engaging in very active behavior that maybe includes running or jumping or yelling or standing on a chair. And I would define all of those things as behaviors that the child is doing. And so when we're using a behavior science perspective, we won't be like, that phrase, you're not behaving, really doesn't make any sense, because everyone and every animal is always behaving. And then observing what animals are doing, defining those behaviors, can help you really understand what's going on with your pet. And it also gives you the tools that you need to modify the behaviors if necessary, which I'll talk more about in other videos. But it's something that I'll do before I start clicker training or using positive reinforcement to train any animal. I'll spend time observing the behavior that they're already doing. And for example, earlier I talked about the tail feather shaking behavior that my chickens do, which I think is really cute, and I might turn into a funny trick by teaching them to do it when I ask them to, using positive reinforcement. Then that's kind of the process. So I've observed a natural behavior that they're doing anyway. I've seen, oh, that is a natural behavior that the chickens do. They shake their tail side to side, and it happens to look really cute. So then I can use that as like a trick that I'll train them to do. But it's already a natural behavior. I'm just gonna use the training process to sort of capture that and put a cue on it. All of which I'm not going to get into in this video because it's too much information, but just wanted to give you some ideas about how observing the behaviors that your pets are already doing can lead to coming up with really fun tricks and fun ideas for clicker training. And then the other thing I talk about a lot is enrichment. And providing enrichment is like a way of changing your animal's environment so that you see a wider range of behaviors in captive settings. So I talked you can look back at my video about enrichment and defining enrichment, and I give a lot of examples of different behaviors like climbing that we could elicit in captivity by giving a bird a large net and putting that on the wall made of parrot safe rope, and then you might see more climbing behavior. So that this whole video should help you understand why as a behavior scientist, it doesn't make sense to me to tell an animal or a person, like, you're being naughty, you're not behaving, because we're all behaving all the time, and it's just a matter of observing those behaviors, those body movements, or sounds, and actions, those things that animals are doing, watching all of those things, and then coming up with our own ways of defining them. And a good way to start doing this is to spend some time watching your pets. Pick one pet and sit down with a piece of paper and a pen and jot down everything that you see your pet do in 30 seconds. Set a timer for 30 seconds. Jot down all the different things that your animal is doing during that time, and see what you observe and what your animal is doing. And I would love to hear in the comments below what you saw, and let me know if you have questions about the definition of behavior, and if you have any anecdotes about fun behaviors you've seen your birds doing or other pets, definitely leave those in the comments. Thank you for watching and subscribing to my channel. Have a great day. Bye.